All right, this video is for the last part of Module 29. So we're going to bring the interest rate models together. So the money market interest rate model and the loanable funds market. So first of all, in the short run, the money market will determine the interest rate, and then the loanable funds market will follow. So remember, the money market is with our demand, a downward sloping demand curve for money, and our vertical money supply, and that determines the interest rate that is charged for short-term financial assets. And the loanable funds market, remember, is going to be the equilibrium is what's charged for interest rate on actual loans. So let's look at an example of this. All right, so here is our money supply. Remember our vertical line that the Fed actually chooses, and this gets moved by monetary policy. Then our kind of concave money demand curve. Okay, and here's our equilibrium interest rate. So let's say the Fed lowers the money supply. So maybe they lowered the money supply by increasing the reserve requirement, or increasing the discount rate, or maybe they go and sell treasury bills. Whatever they do, the money supply is going to move to the left. Let's say the money supply moves to MS2. Okay, now what happens is that obviously we have a new interest rate. So here's our new interest rate, R2, we're going to call that. So the interest rate obviously increases, going from R1 to R2. So what happens? Well, when the interest rate increases, okay, that means that the investment spending is going to decrease because, oh geez, we're not going to want to be able to, we're not going to want to go and get loans at that interest rate. So investment spending is going to decrease. And because investment spending is part of GDP, C plus G plus I plus X, investment spending is going to decrease, so it's decreasing GDP. So because GDP is decreasing, savings decreases. Okay, so we don't have as much money out there, so our savings is going to decrease, which shifts the supply of loanable funds. So if the savings decreases, that's who's offering the supply of loanable funds out there. So savings is going to decrease, and we're going to shift our supply of loanable funds to the left, reaching an equilibrium interest rate. Look at that! It's at R2, which is the same interest rate that is in the money market. So the interest rate that is charged in, you will see that, by the way, if you extend R1 all the way out, they would be the same for both of these as well. The interest rate that is found in the money market is the same interest rate that is found in the loanable funds market. So all we're saying is that in the short run, okay, whatever the Fed does to the money supply will affect the interest rate for the short-term financial assets, but also the interest rate for loanable funds. Okay, now, in the long run, because notice I said in the short run, in the long run, changes in the money supply don't affect the interest rate. Here's why. So, I'm just copying and pasting over the last part of the graph that I just showed you. So notice we're at R2. So we went through that whole, the money supply was decreased because the Fed did something, the investment spending decreased, so GDP decreased, and so there was less savings and decreased the supply of loanable funds, and so it increased the interest rate as a whole. Okay, in the long run, however, price levels will decrease. Why, you ask? Price levels will decrease because what happens in the long run is that since their GDP is lower, okay, then what happens is that all prices will eventually drop. Remember, when we have a lower GDP, we are having a lower price level. So price level drops, as well as, for example, we'll have wages drop. So since wages has dropped and prices have dropped, okay, the demand for money has dropped. Since the price level has dropped, remember, aggregate price level is determined by the demand for money. So the demand for money drops, and what happens? The demand for money goes from MD1 to MD2. And so now it's the equilibrium is back at the original rate of R1. So we go from here to here. Okay, so notice the money supply has not changed, but our interest rate has dropped back to R1. In the long run, GDP will rise then to back to its original level since wages drop. So the supply of loanable funds will shift back to the original curve. So because, like I said, is that in the long run, GDP is going to eventually rise because wages are dropping, and so wages are dropping, things are getting cheaper, and so to produce. So as a result, the short-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift back. And so since wages are dropping and the supply of loanable funds is going to shift back because all of a sudden people have more money to save. So we're saving more money. We're going to shift the supply curve back from S2 to S1. And we're back at R1 as our interest rate. So R1 is determined by the equilibrium of the loanable funds market in the long run, since this is when real GDP equals potential output. So whatever this R1 is, okay, that is going to be when our GDP, that's kind of our long run equilibrium. So if you think about this also in terms of our long run equilibrium from our aggregate demand and aggregate supply model, this is also the same thing, is that our R1, whatever our original equilibrium level is in the loanable funds market, that's what our interest rate is going to be in the long run. All right, hopefully this makes sense. Please let me know if you have any questions. That's it for the financial system.